Alright guys, welcome back to the Pocket Mads channel. It's Maddie here. Today, we are going to be highlighting some of the best new decks that recently came to Pokemon Pocket with the release of B3 Pulsing Aura. A lot of really strong cards came out. Now, I haven't had all of the time in the world to build and test out decks, but there was a 150-player tournament today, and a lot of the best players in Pokemon Pocket competed and built a lot of really cool decks, so that's where I have pulled a lot of these deck lists from. Shout out to anybody if I pull their deck lists in today's video. I don't know who invented the decks or created the decks, but I did want to highlight a couple of these new archetypes that I think are very, very strong. Because a lot's changing. This new expansion had a lot of really strong cards. We're going to have to just wait and see as the season goes on which decks rise to the top. One place that we're going to figure out where all of the new best decks really are is going to be at the PMPT number 29 tournament this weekend. That's right. Pulsing Aura is legal. It is the first tournament of our tournament series of the season, but also the third season of the PMPT. So season rankings are going to reset. You can register for this tournament, link down in the description below. Very fun. We went live last night. My last video was a set review where I talked about all of the cards individually. We went live last night. We tested some stuff. We opened some packs. I'm really excited about this set. I think it's going to be a really, really strong one. I think the metagame is going to change a lot due to a couple of just absolutely strong new decks that have now entered into the metagame. So let's talk about a few of them in today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to register. And let's dive right into it, guys. The first one, actually, we have three. The first three decks are going to be Mega Lucario decks because, quite frankly, this is the biggest story, I think, coming out of B3 is the fact that fighting types now can deal an absolutely absurd amount of damage, particularly to your opponent's EX Pokemon. I think that Mega Lucario is a very decent card. I don't think it's anything super crazy. I just think that, it has access to, of course, Fighting Coach Lucario, which you can pair very easily because you're playing Riolu anyway. And with the new Korrina supporter card and Arena of Antiquity, the amount of damage that Mega Lucario is able to deal, not only Mega Lucario, but really any Mega or any fighting type Pokemon in the game now, is absolutely extraordinary. And it's really cool. Excuse me. I think it's really cool because fighting decks now have a particular identity to them. And that is based around this new support package, which is, again, just dealing an absurd amount of damage to EX Pokemon in particular. And it's a really nice niche to have in the metagame. As we know, some of the best decks in the game don't play Mega Pokemon or EX Pokemon. They don't, they play things like Hydreigon and whatnot. But that being said, a lot of the best decks in the game are EX cards. All of the Mega Pokemon are EXs. Suicune is an EX card. So, I think fighting types is going to be pretty well positioned. The amount of reach that these cards have, and when I say reach, I mean the ability to get a KO when you just don't think they're able to, is really incredible now. Between Fighting Coach Lucario, Korrina, and Arena of Antiquity, that is plus 70 damage. 70 extra damage is nothing to scoff about, especially when Lucario, for 3 energies, is hitting for 140 anyway. Being able to hit for that 190, 210 HP number is a really, really big deal, especially in matchups against other Mega Pokemon where, they are kind of reliant on just not getting 1-hit KO'd. So Mega Lucario plays similarly to how Charizard plays into those Mega decks, but it has enough just going for it in general to where it's not all in on a hyper big attack with a big drawback. It's just a deck that has that potential, but it's a pretty consistent mid-range tempo-based deck anyway. Mega Lucario is the new fighting type Pokemon. There is Crustle EX. I think that Crustle EX is really funny. I don't know how many people will play it. But the other thing to keep in mind is that basically all of the previous fighting Pokemon that we had seem a lot better now, and that's because they have more support. If you really go back and you think about it, some of these Pokemon that were fighting type were never that bad. They just never really had enough support around them, whereas some of the other types had that level of support. Now fighting type just has that support. So Mega Lucario is one example of that. But in the 3 Mega Lucario decks that we're going to highlight here, they're all played with other Pokemon that are now also much better given all of the extra damage buffs. One of those is going to be Hitmonchan. Hitmonchan is a very clear card to be paired with Mega Lucario. It is a basic 2-prize Pokemon, so it's a really good leadoff with a single energy attack cost. It does 50 damage. Now, it doesn't apply weakness, so that is kind of a downside. However, Hitmonchan is going to be really decent in every basically starting scenario. You can attach the Rocky Helmet to it, and you can get buffs with Antiquity or Korrina if you want to, or Fighting Coach Lucario. So Hitmonchan on turn 2, or turn 3 pretty consistently is going to be able to KO a lot of basic Pokemon, and I think that's a really decent threat The reason why I like Hitmonchan is because of the prize math, right? I think if you're playing Mega Lucario as sort of your finishing sweeper Pokemon, you're going to want to play with only other single prize Pokemon or only other two prize Pokemon. That way the prize math doesn't get, mixed up and your opponent doesn't have to go through a Hitmonchan and then like a Tyrogue or something like that, right? So I think Hitmonchan, a pretty clear option. I think that in the tournament today, this was the most popular way that people were playing Lucario. Who knows if it'll end up being the best way to play it, but it certainly is very strong. Theoretically, Hitmonchan can pop off on turn 1 for, I think it's 100 damage onto like a Suicune EX or something, which fundamentally is not okay. That's just incredibly, incredibly strong. The more that I played this set, the more that I think about a lot of these cards, especially from the fighting type stuff, the biggest loser that I think this set has, like if any card or any types of cards are affected most by this new update, it's going to be those basic EX Pokemon. If you lead in Indeedee, or if you lead in Mega Absol, or if you lead off with a Suicune, a lot of those cards didn't seem that bad, or they weren't great, but like if you led with them, it wasn't like the end of the world. Now, all of a sudden, like these fighting type decks are an immediate threat because now they can just Karina and Antiquity and deal an absurd amount of damage really early. So, basic EX Pokemon are a little bit scary, and that goes both ways because Hitmonchan is actually very liable to getting KO'd by some of these non-EX fighting Pokemon that you might be playing with Lucario. So I think that's kind of the one downside, is that Hitmonchan very, very good. However, it's an EX card, so things like Karina and Antiquity work against it, whereas maybe some of the other fighting leadoff Pokemon, it doesn't. Again, just one example here. This Mega Lucario deck, we've got Copycat, Cyrus, Karina. We have a Poncho in here. Rocky Helmet, I think, makes a lot of sense. Again, just further reach. Add plus 20, another plus 20. We have so many plus 20s in here. Between Rocky Helmet, Fighting Coach, Lucario, Antiquity, and then Karina's plus 30. I mean, theoretically, I think Lucario can get up to 230 damage in a single turn, which again is a really big deal. None of these fighting Pokemon would seem nearly as good if we didn't have that ability, and now they do. And this is going to go for any fighting type Pokemon. This could be Donphan, this could be Rampardos, this could be Garchomp, this could be Crustle. Any fighting type Pokemon now is just a much bigger threat, and I think that's a really big deal. Garchomp's something to keep your eye on, and so is Donphan. However, the next Lucario deck that we're going to take a look at is going to be a single prize archetype version with Rampardos and Tyrogue. Now, I think the reason why Tyrogue makes sense into this deck is because Mega Lucario isn't something that you really want up and running early in the game, right? You kind of want to bring it in when you have 2 or 3 energies onto it already, and you want to finish games with it. However, Rampardos is a fossil Pokemon, so we cannot lead off with a Rampardos. In fact, it might end up, as the season goes on, that the best Pokemon to pair with, or best fighting Pokemon to take use of this new these new cards is in fact just going to be Rampardos, because Rampardos is kind of broken. Now, it is something that will get turned off by Chingling. This deck list here is not playing Karina, but I don't really know if you need it, right? Antiquity is going to deal an additional 20 damage with Rampardos, and I think that between Tyrogue and then going into a Rampardos and then finishing off with Lucario is kind of enough. Antiquity plus Fighting Coach is plus 40, so that is 170 on a Rampardos. Plus, Tyrogue gets benefits from these buffs, which is hilarious. So Tyrogue will hit for 40 with Antiquity on an EX card, or 60 with Lucario, which is just really funny in general. So I think Rampardos, definitely an incredibly strong Pokemon, as it always has been, and now that 130 can quickly turn into a much higher number, which is terrifying. The fact that Rampardos can rare candy for 1 energy, come in and start just 1-hit KOing like even the bigger Pokemon in the game is definitely a little bit terrifying, but keep in mind it is a rare candy stage 2 Pokemon. It is a fossil Pokemon, so you cannot, lead, you have to draw into the fossils. Not only that, if you are up against item lock Chingling, you're not going to be able to even play the fossil. So there's a lot, in the way of Rampardos being like a top tier meta contender, but it does make sense. Some people in the tournament today were playing Rampardos with Lucario, so I did just want to highlight an example of it. And then next up is going to be a really interesting deck, which is actually going to be Donphan. And we're still playing the Lucario package, a 1/1 Mega Lucario, Fighting Coach Lucario, but we still have Karina. We're actually playing Training Area instead of Arena of Antiquity, which I don't mind, because again, some decks you're not going to be going up against EX cards. So, Antiquity is interesting, but again, you could plug and play Antiquity instead of Training Arena here. Training Arena is going to give you just a flat plus 10 to both Lucario and Donphan. Antiquity is plus 20, but it's only to EX cards, and Karina we have to further boost that damage. Donphan, very impressive still at the moment. This new Celebi here with Time Recall does allow us to use the Flail attack on Phanpy, which is going to be a pretty big deal. We don't need Memory Light, which is awesome. I think think that this Time Recall Celebi is a really big deal. I think this is going to be a very useful card for several different decks. I wanted to kind of build out a Flygon deck with Celebi, but I don't know if I don't think I have 2 Flygon. I got to get a second one. But yeah, I think that Donphan is another really good example of a Pokemon that is effectively massively buffed now with all of these new fighting buffs. It really is. Also with Celebi. And that's why I wanted to highlight this a little bit more of like a niche version of these Mega Lucario decks. I think, again, the most general version here is just going to be this deck with Hitmonchan and all of the new support cards. But, you know, Donphan is interesting. Not a Pokemon to be slept on whatsoever. 160 HP is a lot. And like I said, this 50 damage for 1 energy quickly becomes 70 with Lucario, quickly becomes 100 damage with Karina. And that might not seem a lot in a single turn. But, you know, once Donphan attacks you 2 or 3 times, you know, the difference now is that you can get 2 and KO'd by the Donphan, whereas before you just couldn't. And that does make it a lot better. Not to mention, if you hit this thing for big damage, but you don't KO it, we get Celebi down, all of a sudden we can flail and kind of reverse all of that damage that Donphan has onto our opponent. But we still get the damage buff, which is what's hilarious. Like, let's just say Donphan has, you know, you hit it for 120 damage, right? And then you hit with Flail, so it's 120 damage attack, plus 20 still because of Fighting Coach Lucario, that's 140. Karina is going to bring that to like 170. Training Arena up to 180. So I really like this build. I think Donphan is very dangerous, and it's also a single energy attack cost. And now we feel a little bit more comfortable attaching all of those extra energies to, of course, Mega Lucario. A lot of different ways that we can play these fighting type decks. I think they're the biggest story right now. That's why I wanted to highlight 3 different versions of these Lucario decks that people played in today's tournament that I liked the most. Shout out to all of these decks and whoever built these decks in particular, because I really, really like them. And very similar to kind of what I would build with Lucario. The other one that I would maybe think about building is just with like a Hitmon, Hitmonlee or Hitmonchan or Hitmontop type of deck. But honestly, I think Tyrogue is probably just better because it's 0 energy. Yeah. Very, very, very strong cards. You know, Garchomp is another one. The thing about this set is that, that's the next deck. Oop, spoiler alert. We're going to do another video either tomorrow or the day after where we're talking about updated decks. Because a lot of older decks are again, massively buffed by some of these new cards. Celebi is an example of that. The fighting type support could be really helpful for non-Lucario decks, so we're going to highlight some other fighting type decks in the future. We have, the Parasol Lady, which is going to be really nice for Crawdon and Ninetales, which a lot of people are playing. And then, of course, Victini with Moltres decks. There's a lot of, old strategies that have been updated now with some of the new cards, so we're going to leave that for a separate video. This is a video today talking about specifically some of the new strategies and new decks. But anyway, that is Lucario. And speaking of Victini, I wanted to talk about Emboar, because I think this deck is massively slept on. I think that Emboar is actually incredibly strong. What's really cool about Emboar is that Tepig here has the Stoke attack. So you flip a coin, and if heads, you take 2 fighting energy from your energy zone and attach it to this Pokemon. Now, this is an attack, not an ability, which means that Victini's Victory Star ability allows us to kind of re-roll this coin flip if we don't get it, which greatly reduces the ability or increases the ability for us to immediately get enough energies onto Tepig. So going second, on your first turn, Tepig is going to be a really great leadoff option. It's actually incredibly strong. That is kind of the only consistent way that we can get these fire energies onto Emboar, but I still think that it's going to be really good enough because Emboar has 160 HP and it does 70 damage, 30 more for each heads. You flip 3 coins. So odds are with Victory Star, because we can do it twice at least, you're going to get at least 2 heads, which all of a sudden means that Emboar is hitting most often for like 130 damage. Very dangerous Pokemon. Now, you can play Victini with things like Moltres to set up really any other fire-type Pokemon in the game. That might be worth playing, even with something like an Emboar, or even just with Charizard decks now. Maybe you don't even need Charmeleon. You can just play like Moltres, Victini. Something to really think about, but I wanted to highlight Emboar. Somebody brought it to the tournament today, and I think it actually has a ton of potential. So there you go. I think Victini is really cool. There are certain Pokemon that are going to like this a lot. I think that, of course, Moltres is like the big one off the top of my head. Tepig works really well with it. There's a new card, another new card that works with Victini. That's a fire type. I'm just kind of forgetting it off the top of my head. But I wanted to highlight at least one sort of new Victini deck that I thought definitely had a little bit of potential. So here is Emboar. You know what I mean? Shout out to Emboar. Camerupt is funny. We tried and tested Camerupt a little bit. I just think Camerupt itself is a very bad card. I just think it's not worth playing at all. Not only do you need to find the evolution, you need to get 4 energies onto that thing, which you can do with Moltres, but then you also are just up to the RNG of hitting 160 on a random Pokemon. And if your opponent has a full bench, and if they're playing single prize Pokemon, the odds of you being able to win a game through just attacking with Camerupt is extremely low. And that is really, really sad. So I know some people are going to ask me about Camerupt. I really don't think it's that relevant. I don't think Camerupt is a meta Pokemon by any stretch. I think Emboar is like objectively better. Yeah, we did test out Emboar a little bit. It's definitely not terrible, but it's not great either. Let's be honest, okay? Or a Camerupt rather. Next up is going to be a Flygon deck. That's a little bit different than like the expert solo battle deck idea that I kind of had with Flygon, of course, which is going to be playing the middle evolution, and then you're going to be playing Celebi to be able to use that attack. Flygon is really interesting. Sand Slammer means that in between turns on Pokemon Checkup, you deal 10 damage to all of your opponent's Pokemon, and that is kind of a big deal. I think that Flygon is actually a really decent Pokemon. Now, the one issue with Flygon, of course, is the fact that it's going to be kind of difficult to get Grass and Fighting Energy on this Pokemon to use the attack, right? That is the inherent downside to really all Dragon Pokemon is the multi-energy attack cost. But this Pokemon has no weakness. It has a 180 HP amount, which is a lot. We can access things like Indeedee and Lucky Ice Pop to keep this thing alive for even longer. And like I said, it's just a lot of spread damage. Now, 140 damage on the attack isn't terrible. Theoretically speaking, you can kind of slow roll Flygon. You can kind of keep it in the active for as long as possible. Hopefully you draw into Rare Candy. We are running double Research, double Copycat, and the Hiking Trail with Rare Candy, which we like to see in the Rare Candy decks. Rocky Helmet as well to deal even more additional damage. And it's something that can be very dangerous. It's something to not sleep on. Now, I don't know if like the Celebi stuff and dealing the additional 10 damage to your opponent's Pokemon every turn is worth it. Like, I think it's probably better to just kind of invest in keeping Flygon alive for longer. But I think Flygon is a very interesting Pokemon, one that I think definitely deserves a little bit of research, a little bit of testing. I don't know if it'll really end up being like a top tier meta deck. I don't know exactly who was playing this particular list in the tournament, I forget, but it was my favorite Flygon deck that people were playing today, so I wanted to highlight it to you guys. Something that deserves a little bit of testing. It definitely deserves some testing. The sleep decks are still going to be common, so the Ogerpon makes some sense, and we are, of course, playing Grass and Fighting Energies in this deck list, so we might be able to get the dual Grass Energies onto Ogerpon. But realistically, Flygon is a two-prize Pokemon. You know what I mean? So, like, you can get double Flygons out or finish the game with Ogerpon. I honestly like it. I do. And this is a deck that definitely relies on getting a little lucky with Lucky Ice Pop, but a lot of decks do in the metagame, and the damage is going to rack up really quickly. Like, you know what I mean? If your opponent has any baby Pokemon on their bench or low HP Pokemon that are basics, you know, the pressure is on because those Pokemon will just start getting KO'd, which is pretty cool. Plus all of that damage chip, plus 140 if you do get the Dragon Pulse off, is going to probably just end up KOing Pokemon anyway. You know, so I think Flygon has a lot more potential than I think a lot of people maybe give it credit for at first glance. We'll have to see if it kind of remains or continues to be, you know, a meta-relevant Pokemon as time goes on. I'm a little bit skeptical of Flygon. And speaking of skeptical, let's talk about Sceptile. Sceptile? I think it's called Sceptile. I always called it Sceptile, but there is a C in there. Is the C silent? Who knows? Yeah, Mega Sceptile is a really, really fun Pokemon. One of my favorite Pokemon, honestly, coming in this set. I think that Sceptile is good for really all of the reasons that typical Mega Pokemon are good. Is that it's got a decent amount of HP, low energy attack cost, and it's just a consistent, nice, strong Pokemon. What I really like about all grass-type decks in the game right now is going to be the new access to the stadium, Fragrant Forest. Say that 5 times fast. This is an incredible stadium card. Any deck that is not playing grass-type Pokemon will just not be able to utilize this at all, but we're going to get great use out of it. And what I really like about this deck is that we can kind of utilize some tools that you don't normally get to utilize when you're playing a grass-type deck. That, of course, being Poison Barb and Nihilego, right? The damage adds up here way more than you might think. In the same way that Hydreigon with Poison Barb Nihilego, the damage adds up and all of a sudden you're just taking KOs. Sceptile has the same exact sort of damage output of 130. But with Poison Barb Nihilego, that's an additional 20 damage, taking every turn with poison, whether opponent attacks us and attacks into our Pheromosa or not. And I do think Pheromosa pairs really well with this because it's also an Ultra Beast. Not that that really matters, but it's an Ultra Beast, and you can kind of Poison Barb, Pheromosa lead, and then, you know, not only deal damage to the active, but to the bench, you know, and sort of set up for a Cyrus play late in the game. You kind of go into Sceptile. The damage numbers honestly just sort of work out. Most decks are not going to be able to hit us for 210 damage. It's a decent amount of HP. I know we talked about how Lucario can reach that highly, but Sceptile's pacing, its consistency is honestly just going to be a pretty big deal. You could play Celebi with Sceptile. I know some people have asked me about Celebi and Sceptile to be able to use the Slicing Snipe attack for Grovyle, which is pretty cool to hit that 50 damage to KO, but honestly, I think the bench damage with Cyrus for Pheromosa is a fair enough win condition outright. And I really like this deck. We're playing 4 basic grass Pokemon, which is a really big deal. So again, like that one stadium with Fragrant Forest is going to be really, really big from a consistency standpoint. Not only is it pulling a basic Pokemon out of our deck list, but it's further increasing the opportunity for us to be able to pull Nihilego out with the Pokeball, right? So like if you lead with a grass type basic like Pheromosa, you play Fragrant Forest, you pull out a Trico. Now we only have a couple of basic Pokemon in our deck, and it's much more likely that we can draw into Nihilego with Pokeball. And that's just a lot of thinning. It's just a lot of thinning out of our deck. We've got Copycat and Research in here for extra consistency. It's a really, really good deck list. I think that Sceptile is very slept on. I think this might be Njord's deck. This might be Njord's deck. I think that, again, one of the better players in the game. He beat me playing this deck on stream last night, and it just seemed really strong. It just felt like the damage all kind of lined up. It was a very consistent deck list, and one that I just thought was very, very good. So massive respect to him. And Sceptile, I think it's something that we just can't sleep on. We just need to appreciate that Sceptile's good. It's just a really, really good deck. And I don't know if it'll be like that. You know, it's hard to say, like, which Pokemon and which decks will really rise to the top this season, because we still have all of the old stuff. However, I do think Suicune has been nerfed pretty heavily by all of the fighting type buffs. In the same vein, you know, we do have Magnezone EX now, which is kind of scary. We'll leave that for an updated decks video in the future. One of the new decks and new strategies that we're not covering today is going to be Mega Audino. I do think that's kind of a meme deck. I think Mega Steelix is going to be a better sustain deck, but Bramble-Gast Audino does seem very interesting. So it's something that I hopefully somebody builds out and plays, and we can kind of see it do well in a competitive setting, because I would like to analyze the Audino deck. I just didn't have an example to show you guys. We'll highlight it, I promise. We'll talk about it in a later video for sure. You're going to want to stay updated, because we're going to be covering the metagame and all of these new decks more and more as the season goes on. Especially, I assume if we get enough people at PMPT 29 this weekend, we'll see at least one example of like every new archetype or strategy, and probably some stuff that we didn't really see coming, which is going to be really cool. The new Boundful Field or Bounded Field Stadium is really interesting as well. I'm just really curious to see kind of what happens moving forward this season, because I think there's going to be a lot of potential just for crazy things to pop up and do well. Sceptile, again, it's not anything too crazy. I think this deck just has enough going for it. I said it already. You know, the 130, the high HP amount, the low energy attack costs. Pheromosa is a really, really good Pokemon. Poison Barb, Nihilego. Fragrant Forest is a really big buff to all grass-type decks. And I think Sceptile is just sort of the best grass Pokemon that we have now. I do. I just think it's going to be the standard, just sort of grass-type Pokemon. I know it's basically Blaziken, but it feels better than Blaziken for some reason. And I kind of feel like it's because of Poison Barb, Nihilego, and also maybe Pheromosa. I don't know. Maybe it's Fragrant Forest. There's just something about this deck that makes me really have more confidence in it than just like a typical Blaziken deck. We do have the new Fire-type cast form, though, which is something that we got to keep our eye on, because I am really curious about that Pokemon in particular for Fire-type decks. But yeah, nothing else to really say here. Just your old typical 2 energy attack cost, you know, consistent, strong Mega Pokemon. Now it's Grass type. Maybe worth playing Leaf Cape instead of Poison Bar, but I think the extra damage is probably just a bit better here. Because this is a low energy attack cost Pokemon, we need to note that it is somewhat easy to just get a second Sceptile set up. You know what I mean? Like, you can just get another one set up. It does discard energies after you play it, though, which is definitely a big caveat about this deck. It's going to struggle with any deck that discards energies, which we do have some of those entered into the metagame. So if you get your energy discarded, that's going to be something that Sceptile really doesn't deal with very well. Unlike Blaziken, right? Because it has Flame Patch. But yeah, anyway, Sceptile. Lastly, though, which honestly might end up being actually like the biggest story in this new set, is going to be Zoroark EX. So here's the deal. This Pokemon is very, very good. And when I tested it, I realized that it was consistent, it was strong, it was very impressive, but it felt very similar to Hydreigon to me. It felt like I was playing sort of a different version of Hydreigon, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I am starting to wonder, I'm starting to be curious if the metagame will just become you know, these dark type decks with Darkrai and Absol, just like we play with Hydreigon, or if Zoroark will just kind of take over Hydreigon. This might be, I'm not going to jump the gun here. I'm not going to just say it outright, but Zoroark has the potential to take over the spot that Hydreigon has in the metagame. Now, this is not a deck that's going to be able to deal with Oricorio as easily, which Hydreigon, that was a big benefit of Hydreigon, but Zoroark feels so good. It feels super consistent. This Pokemon has a single energy attack cost on a stage 1 Pokemon, for basically 90 damage if you have a full bench. Bombardier is an interesting card, and I do not think it's a bad card. I understand that like Sky Support Shaman is its own deal here. In fact, like this deck would be almost entirely the same if you were to play Sky Support Shaman than Bombardier, because it does the same thing. Just it allows you to get the one extra or -1 retreat cost for like Evolution Dark Pokemon. But most of the Pokemon we would want to be retreating in this deck is like a basic Pokemon anyway. But Bombardier technically better than Shaman in the deck, so we're just playing Shaman. Or sorry, we're just playing Bombardier. But I don't really believe in this card because if you lead with it, it doesn't give it itself free retreat. I just don't like this effect, and I don't like Sky Support Shaman, but that's beside the point. Zoroark here, because it has a single energy attack cost, means that you can use those subsequent energies to attach to Darkrai, and now that 90 becomes 110 damage. We can play Trading Arena, all of a sudden it's 120 damage every turn on a Pokemon that can get set up on your second turn almost every time. This Pokemon is extremely consistent. We're also playing this non-EX Zoroark, I assume for Oricorio decks, but this is a pretty cool Pokemon. If your opponent's Pokemon was knocked out by damage from this Pokemon's attack during your opponent's next turn, prevent all damage and effects of attacks done to this Pokemon. So if you could come in, maybe KO an Oricorio with Zoroark, it's just sort of going to get an extra attack off, which is really cool. It is a single prize attacker, which you don't necessarily want in this deck list, but it will be very effective against Oricorio, so I think it makes sense to play it. But let's talk about Zorua, because this Ascension attack is actually a really big deal. If you go first, again, it's actually a really good thing because we can just evolve into Zoroark on our second turn going first before our opponent can evolve, and then we start hitting for a Brutal Bash. But if you lead Zorua and you go second, it's actually not that bad. You're not going to get turn 2 Hydreigon KO'd because you can just attack with Ascension and then immediately evolve into Zoroark, which is a big deal because next turn we have 150 HP. So no matter really what happens, we're going to be able to get the Brutal Bash attack off, which is really nice. Like that's a really good thing. It's a big deal. Now, we did get the new Zarude card, which is a 2-energy revenge attacker, which you could play in place of Mega Absol, but I don't really think it's better than Mega Absol. Like, the 120 is technically better than 80, but I think in a deck like this, we're definitely playing Darkrai EX, and I think Absol just makes sense because it's Absol, so you just sort of throw it into the deck list. We're also playing Cyrus, Sabrina, Pokemon Center Lady, Giant Cape, and Lucky Ice Pop. And I think this really kind of it also feels similar to Manectric. It feels similar in the sense that it's like, okay, so we're just consistent and dealing a lot of damage, like early, you know what I mean? We're fast paced and we're consistent. And that's like been enough to allow your deck to be really, really good moving forward. Like that's the thing. And again, like Zorua's attack means that just way more often you are getting into Zoroark on turn 2. Even if you go first and you can't use the attack, you're probably going to draw into it. But even if you don't, like you can straight up just... you can just sort of use Ascension. It does make the deck a lot more consistent. I really like Zoroark. In fact, in the tournament today, this was the most popular deck. This was the most played strategy in this new tournament. So it looks like Zoroark might be kind of on top. It might be on top. I was kind of surprised in this tournament, at least with 150 players, to not see anybody playing the new Inteleon package. I thought it would be extremely strong. Not many people playing it, but I guess people just sort of choosing to play maybe some of the other new strategies. It's something that we'll highlight again in the updated deck lists video. We'll kind of talk about that in a future video here in the upcoming days. But yeah, anyway, these are kind of the top strongest decks that I'm seeing immediately enter the metagame in these early tournaments. Comment down below. Let me know what you guys think. You know, what decks, what strategies are you guys playing? Which ones do you think are going to end up being the best? I genuinely am curious, so comment down below. Let me know. And again, do not forget, you got to register for PMPT number 29, the first tournament of this new season. Link to register down in the description below. We have already almost 100 people registered, which is really, really fun. It's going to be super cool. We're going to stream it this weekend. It's going to be a great time. Really, really excited about that. And yeah, guys. There we go. Lucario, seemingly all of the fighting stuff is absolutely very dangerous. Flygon, Emboar, very interesting, but kind of maybe potentially the two best archetypes to come out here are going to be Sceptile and Zoroark, two incredibly strong decks. Mega Audino, interesting. We'll take a look at it as more people play it. Skarmory is interesting. Crustal's interesting. Magnezone also interesting, but we'll leave those for a future video. So stay tuned for all of that, guys. All right, don't forget to like and subscribe. Peace out. We'll talk to you guys later. Have a good one. And yeah. Bye.